Buenos días, por favor. Buenos días, por favor, sentémonos. Vamos a dar comienzo a la presentación habitual, por otra parte, del World Energy Outlook. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Para nosotros, como todos los años, es un placer repetir esto y tener a Laura con nosotros. Welcome, Laura. Vamos a dar comienzo a esta presentación con el siguiente programa. Empezaremos con unas palabras de bienvenida de nuestro presidente Francisco Reynés, de la directora de EDP, Yolanda Fernández, y posteriormente una intervención de Víctor Marcos, director general de Planificación y Coordinación Energética, al cual felicitamos personalmente aquí desde su nombramiento en el mes de agosto. Posteriormente pasaremos a una intervención de Laura, lo hago en español porque ella entiende bien el español, ¿no? Y posteriormente tendremos tiempo de preguntas, de coloquio, para lo que queráis preguntar a Laura en español o en inglés. Por favor, presidente, Paco, por favor.
Bueno, pues muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por asistir un año más a esta presentación del Energy Outlook. Dos menciones especiales de agradecimiento. Una a Víctor Marcos, recientemente nombrado director general de Planificación y Coordinación Energética aquí en el Ministerio de Transición Energética y Reto Demográfico en el mes de agosto, si no recuerdo mal. Y otra a Laura Cozzi, que nos acompaña, que es la miembro de la dirección de la Agencia Internacional de la Energía y responsable de todo lo que son los outlooks, ¿no? No me voy a extender, solo hablar muy poco y además creo que cuanto más breve mejor. Pero no sé si todo el mundo es consciente que ya llevamos 17 años seguidos haciendo esta presentación, 17 outlooks de la energía que de alguna forma han cambiado muchas de las percepciones de policymakers y gobiernos, teniendo unos datos muy globales y muy específicos y que ayudan a todo lo que es la planificación energética. Desgraciadamente, ya no puedo decir a la salida de este encuentro se podrán llevar un ejemplar, porque ya no se emiten ejemplares y aquellos que nos gusta leer en papel lo tenemos que imprimir, pero ya está disponible desde, si no recuerdo mal, el 16 de octubre. Por lo tanto, enhorabuena al Instituto, a la Agencia Internacional de la Energía por esa constante actualización de unos datos que para todas las empresas energéticas son muy importantes seguir, aportar y colaborar, ¿no? Probablemente todos conocemos el Energy Outlook como la publicación de la Agencia Internacional de la Energía, pero no es la única. Y en ese sentido quería recordar que el Club Español de la Energía va a ser el portavoz de presentaciones de varios otros nuevos informes que la agencia va a ir homologando en los próximos meses y, como no podía ser de otra forma, el Instituto, el Club Español de la Energía va a utilizarlos pues, para hacer esa comunicación hacia el exterior, ¿no? Yo creo que hablar de energía cada vez más es hablar de tres problemas fundamentales que competen a la sociedad en general, tanto a lo que es la parte política como la parte empresarial, ¿no? La preocupación por la seguridad de suministro, el compromiso con la reducción de emisiones y la búsqueda de la asequibilidad de los precios de la energía, que con ello lleve a una mayor competitividad también de las empresas. Hemos leído últimamente informes como el informe Letta o el informe Draghi, que hacía mucho hincapié en que la energía debía ser uno de los pilares fundamentales en los que basar la competitividad de las empresas. Recientemente Esta mañana aparecía en el Financial Times una publicación de que una grandísima empresa europea, alemana, la Volkswagen, ha decidido poner en riesgo 3 fábricas precisamente por dejar de ser competitivo en el sector del automóvil. Y uno de los problemas que decía que podía ser el causante de su falta de competitividad, digo uno, no todos, es las situaciones del coste energético, ¿no? La energía está allí y probablemente seguirá estándolo, y yo creo que una publicación como el Outlook 2024 nos va a seguir ayudando a tener una perspectiva de nuestro trabajo, de nuestras empresas, y también a aquellos que representan a la Administración una perspectiva más objetiva para tomar decisiones que nos pueden implicar a todos, ¿no? Yo creo que el dato más importante de la energía de los últimos tiempos, que probablemente nos debería hacer sentirnos más orgullosos de lo que está pasando, es precisamente el ritmo inversor, y en concreto el ritmo inversor en todo lo que tiene que ver con tecnologías bajas de emisiones y, por lo tanto, el cambio de tendencia mundial. Es la primera vez que podemos decir que un ratio que solía ser de 2:1, y lo veremos en concreto en el Energy Outlook que se presenta hoy, que es la cantidad de inversiones dedicadas a lo que tiene que ver con combustibles fósiles comparado con la cantidad de inversiones que tienen que ver con tecnologías libres de emisiones, se ha convertido en un ratio 1:1. En un ratio 1:1 significa que aproximadamente 2 trillones de euros que se han invertido en el año 2024, de esos la mitad han ido destinados a fuentes de tecnologías libres de emisiones, de tecnologías limpias, cambiando totalmente una tendencia. Yo creo que esta es la mejor noticia, que significa que nos va a ayudar esa tendencia a alcanzar lo antes posible aquella cima que era empezar a reducir globalmente las emisiones y no aumentarlas. Y como dato, pues allí lo dejo, que creo que habla mucho más de todo lo que yo pueda decir. Pero aprovecho también para recordar que eso tiene una relación directa con la inversión. Y en ese sentido quiero aprovechar estos pocos minutos que tengo para pedir de nuevo, como sector, como industria, unas políticas que incentiven la inversión. Porque yo creo que el incentivo a la inversión no es ni más ni menos que el incentivo a seguir avanzando en la descarbonización y en la creación de riqueza, de puestos de trabajo y de energía competitiva. Y en este sentido, si me permitís, decir que para el sector de la energía, esta incentivación a la inversión se centra en pocos pero pilares muy fundamentales. Lo primero es la agilidad administrativa. Intentar que todo el proceso de permitting nos permita alcanzar la ejecutabilidad de las inversiones en el tiempo más corto posible. Lo segundo es la seguridad jurídica, un marco de tranquilidad jurídica bajo el cual se puedan hacer esas inversiones que tienen un objetivo temporal de largo plazo y que necesitan de una seguridad jurídica de cara también a facilitar el acceso a los recursos económicos que no son nuestros, sino que son de nuestros inversores y que por ello lo demandan. Lo tercero, la estabilidad regulatoria. La estabilidad regulatoria que podría estar muy ligada a la seguridad jurídica, pero que forma parte de nuestro sector de una forma muy importante. Y, por último, también la estabilidad fiscal. Yo creo que estas 4 condiciones son las que nos tienen que permitir, y me gustaría, como presidente de Enerclub, alzar una voz en ese sentido, de incentivar la inversión a través de darle un marco estable. Por último, el informe no solamente habla de números, sino que también este año profundiza en otros aspectos como podrían ser la velocidad y los diferentes escenarios de velocidad de crecimiento en la utilización de energías renovables, cómo podría aumentar la demanda de GNL y las bombas de calor, las políticas de eficiencia, etc. No se queda solamente en unas tablas numéricas, sino que también profundiza el análisis de sensibilidad. Si me permiten, paso 2 minutos al inglés. I want to introduce and thank you in special your attendance. Laura Cozzi, directora del Instituto de la Energía, la Agencia Internacional de la Energía. She joined the International Agency in 1999, which means a long time ago, but with a lot of experience. Thank you for coming once a year more here in Madrid. I think that your work has been grateful for the output we are receiving on this topic, and I thank you very much for being here and being you the one that is going to introduce your report that is for us very valuable and very useful for our planning. Gracias a todos por atenderme y le paso la palabra a EDP y su representante Yolanda, que es el patrocinador de este acto. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días a todos. Es un placer para EDP patrocinar este evento que nos permite escuchar de primera mano pues, la visión de futuro que tiene la Agencia Internacional de la Energía. Bueno, ya sabemos todos que las consecuencias adversas del cambio climático están presionando al mundo para que se descarbonice y que se electrifique. Por eso estamos inmersos en una transición energética que en realidad es una carrera contra el tiempo. Tenemos que rehacer en solo 30 años lo que tardamos 200 años en construir y además tenemos que hacerlo con 2.000 millones de personas que tienen derecho a un suministro energético asequible y fiable. Como ya comentábamos, pasar de un sistema energético basado en combustibles fósiles a otro basado en energías renovables, que principalmente tiene costes fijos para su implantación, requiere realizar inversiones significativas en plazos muy cortos de tiempo. Desde ahora hasta 2030 necesitamos multiplicar anualmente por 3 lo que hemos hecho en 2023. ¿Y dónde van a ir esas inversiones? Pues esas inversiones irán a la energía renovable, a la eólica, al almacenamiento, a la solar, pero también a las redes, que han de ser la columna vertebral de este nuevo modelo, facilitando la conexión entre los distintos agentes. Como ya comentábamos, la viabilidad de los proyectos y su tramitación son claves para su ejecución. Si por un lado nos encontramos con la reducción de costes tecnológicos que han aumentado la competitividad de los proyectos, por otro, nos enfrentamos a los desafíos de los altos costes de financiación y a la incertidumbre económica. En cuanto a la tramitación, no podemos dejar de quejarnos de la tramitación porque la simplificación de procesos administrativos y los marcos regulatorios y fiscales claros son esenciales para atraer inversiones y acelerar el desarrollo de estos proyectos. Pero no solo somos los promotores de proyectos o los gestores de infraestructuras los que vamos a hacer las inversiones. La decisión de optar por la electrificación y el uso de fuentes alternativas, como el hidrógeno, depende de los clientes y es necesario encontrar formas de hacer este proceso de transición más atractivo y más eficiente para ellos. Sin embargo, creo que podemos ser optimistas, especialmente teniendo en cuenta el hecho de que hoy estamos en España y que España se ha posicionado como una de los líderes europeos en energías renovables, con más de un 60% de este tipo de energía en nuestro sistema energético. Además, tenemos algunas características particulares. Unos factores de capacidad elevados, con más de 300 días de sol al año, unos bajos precios de la electricidad, aproximadamente un 47% más barato que el precio medio del mercado mayorista en Europa. Y estas circunstancias lo que dan lugar es a un creciente interés, tanto por parte de agentes productores, hay más de 150 gigavatios en el portfolio esperando para conectarse a la red, como por los consumidores, que buscan estas energías incluso grandes empresas internacionales que quieren instalarse en España. Por eso podemos esperar un importante impacto económico de la transición energética que podría alcanzar entre un 10 y un 20% de valor añadido en 2035. En un proceso de transformación tan importante está incluida toda la sociedad necesariamente de una forma directa o indirecta. La descentralización de la generación de energía abre una ventana de oportunidad para que los territorios que se encontraban apartados de las áreas de crecimiento económico puedan verse ahora incluidos. Los proyectos de energías renovables en zonas rurales, que ahora se miden en decenas y centenas de megavatios, pueden revitalizar estos entornos atrayendo empresas, creando empleo y fomentando el desarrollo económico y local. Por eso adquiere cada vez más importancia la aceptación social de los proyectos. Trabajar con las comunidades locales para abordar sus preocupaciones y garantizar que los beneficios de esta transformación sean apreciados y compartidos por todos es cada vez más fundamental. En conjunto, y supongo que hoy lo veremos reforzado, este reto de la transición energética requiere un enorme esfuerzo colectivo entre todas las partes interesadas, públicas y privadas. Quiero finalizar resaltando la decisiva labor que viene realizando la Agencia Internacional de la Energía, no solo proporcionando al mundo análisis y perspectiva, sino también orientaciones y directrices y, sobre todo, tendiendo puentes y acercando a los países en un reto que en este momento es de todos. Muchas gracias y paso la palabra al director general Víctor Marcos. Muchas gracias.
Muy buenos días. Bueno, pues después de estos dos estupendos ponentes y viniendo luego a la agencia, la verdad que cuesta decir algo original, ¿no? Pero bueno, vamos a intentar hacer unas reflexiones, yo creo que bastantes de ellas compartidas y dar la palabra a Laura, que yo creo que es la protagonista del evento, ¿no? Ha salido en las anteriores intervenciones la importancia de la planificación, la importancia de la previsibilidad. Mi dirección general se llama Planificación y Coordinación Energética. O sea, no puedo considerar que sea algo menos importante que los anteriores ponentes. Desde luego, creo que en un sector tan intensivo en capital, con inversiones tan a largo plazo, la previsibilidad, la planificación, la prospectiva, o sea, saber qué va a pasar, no exactamente, ¿no? Ya hablábamos en la charla inicial de cuántos van a ser los megavatios, sino saber y tener la sensibilidad de si aplico esta política pública puedo tener una reacción de este estilo, ¿no? que yo creo que es lo que buscamos, intentar prever un poco qué puede ocurrir en función de la política pública que apliquemos. Pues yo creo que eso es muy relevante hacerlo, es muy relevante actualizarlo. La verdad que estamos muy agradecidos a la agencia por el trabajo que hace todos los años, que a nosotros, a su vez, nos invita a hacerlo a escala nacional. Destacar dos o tres cosas del informe, cuento luego dos o tres ideas también del PENIEC y le cedo la palabra a Laura. Me parece relevante de este informe la parte de las tensiones geopolíticas. Es verdad que lo hemos vivido quizás más intensamente hace 2 años, hace un año. El informe señala que se vienen relajando un poco esas tensiones, ¿no? Yo creo que España en resolver esas tensiones y bueno, por circunstancia, hemos sido un agente muy relevante dentro de la Unión Europea, mercado GNL. Hemos sido capaces de, digamos, no sufrir tan intensamente esas tensiones, esos desafíos y además ayudar a nuestros socios europeos a superarlo. Es verdad que ahí juega un papel muy relevante el mercado del GNL y el informe también lo apunta, que va a aumentar ese mercado de GNL, ¿no? ¿Qué permite ese mercado GNL? Permite diversificación, ¿no? Yo me he dedicado también años a la gestión de riesgo, pues una política muy relevante en la gestión de riesgo, ¿no? Quizás la básica, la primera línea, pues es diversificar, ¿no? Luego podemos hacer otras cosas. Lo apuntaba la responsable de EDP, Yolanda, La distribución de inversiones, esa parte de quién sufre el impacto, que también tenga al menos parte o que visibilice, seamos capaces de visibilizar esos beneficios. Yo creo que los aspectos sociales de la implementación de tecnologías, y yo creo que aquí es muy relevante las tecnologías renovables, ¿no? Por ese creciente rechazo desde un punto de vista social que estamos viendo. Yo creo que prestar atención a esa parte de inversiones, de generar cadena de valor, tejido cercano al territorio, yo creo que eso nos puede ayudar a todos a conseguir que esas inversiones se produzcan. Por parte de las administraciones tenemos un interés claro, yo creo que es una fuente de competitividad inigualable, pero bueno, desde las empresas pues también, desde luego, tenéis un interés claro porque son vuestras inversiones, ¿no? O sea, con lo cual yo creo que estamos en el mismo barco. Y esta parte que señala el WEO en análisis de centrarse en las personas y ser resiliente, creo que es fundamental también desde un punto de vista climático, porque es verdad que pues en España vivimos en un país que, según los estudios de la Agencia Europea del Medio Ambiente, puede ser de los que más sufran el cambio climático desde un punto de vista, si hablamos de energía, menor hidraulicidad, pero bueno, menores lluvia. Somos un país con un sector agrícola importante, pues bueno, eso puede traer otros problemas, no solo económicos, también sociales, ¿no? O sea que yo creo que está bien que levantemos la vista y intentamos aplicar estas políticas de adaptación. Y por último, quería señalar algunas ideas claves de lo que hemos presentado recientemente. Nuestro Plan Nacional a 2030 lo hemos presentado al poco de llegar yo al cargo. También algunas cifras. Año 2023, primer año que España, una de las grandes economías de la Unión Europea, supera el 50% de energías renovables en el mix eléctrico. Yo creo que es un hito relevante. Somos uno de los países en atractivo inversor, lo han señalado los anteriores ponentes. Hay muchas expectativas, muchos proyectos en desarrollo que están pasando en España. Somos el primer país en el mundo en proyectos greenfield en desarrollo. Hemos crecido en los últimos 4 años en capacidades renovables mucho más de lo que veníamos haciendo. Es verdad que, bueno, quizás si hablamos de las dos tecnologías principales, fotovoltaica y eólica, pues quizás nos vendría mejor desde un punto de vista abstracto, pues potenciar un poco más el crecimiento eólico, pero es verdad que todos sabemos aquí que las políticas públicas para hacer eso no es darle un botón y eso sucede, sino que bueno, hay que trabajar mucho, ¿no? Y tiene mucho que ver lo que comentaba anteriormente de la aceptación social. Yo creo que lo que pretendemos con el PNIEC es generar ese marco, dar una certidumbre, dar algunas señales y creemos que están bastante alineadas, por ejemplo, con el informe que ha hecho Mario Draghi de la Unión Europea. Yo creo que en España, con la implantación de tecnologías renovables eléctricas, tecnología e-fuels, hidrógeno, tenemos una oportunidad delante muy relevante y nos puede ayudar también a eso que mencionaba de fijar tejido y tratar de atraer inversiones, no solo en la parte de oferta del sector energético, sino también, y lo estamos haciendo, en la parte de demanda. Es verdad que ahí en medio, y lo mencionaban los ponentes anteriores, están las redes, ¿no? Ahora mismo es el tema relevante. Nosotros en el ministerio sabéis que hemos abierto una reflexión al respecto y es algo que comentamos abiertamente, vamos. La importancia que pensamos que tienen las redes. Contamos con la población, hemos hecho un proceso participativo para hacer los planes, para hacer las normas que hacemos consultas previas, hacemos trámites de audiencia, es verdad que lo marca la ley, pero nos interesa escuchar a los sectores, nos interesa saber qué es lo que pasa, porque el objetivo final, como decía antes, yo creo que está alineado. Con esto nada más. Yo creo que el diagnóstico que hace la Agencia Internacional de la Energía es muy relevante. Vamos a escuchar con atención a ver qué aspectos señala Laura. Y nada más, os agradezco a Enerclub la bienvenida que me habéis dado, la enhorabuena que me habéis dado, todos los que me la habéis dado, muchísimas gracias. Para mí es un desafío y desde luego cuento con todos vosotros. Con algunos ya nos hemos visto, con otros nos veremos. Mi correo, mi buzón, mi teléfono está a vuestra disposición para cualquier tema que podamos hablar, que podamos ayudar desde mi dirección, pues para eso estamos. Así que nada, muchas gracias y buenos días.
So, good morning, everyone. First of all, many thanks to Arcadio and his team. 17 years, and I think personally I've been here for the 9th year in a row, so very many thanks for the collaboration and partnership over such a long period. Today we brought you with Victor a special gift, Paris weather. Please enjoy it. Many thanks to Mr. President, Mr. Reynés. Many thanks to EDP for sponsoring the event. Congratulations to Marcos for the new role. Looking forward to working even more closely together in the months and years to come. So, as usual, we come to Spain relatively soon after we released the World Energy Outlook. We released it just 2 weeks ago. And the way we do this presentation is very much usually a conversation rather than a presentation. So I'll tell you what are the key findings, and there, I think for us the richness is really very much exchanging views with all of you. So I'd like to start with probably the first scene setter, and maybe we start with understanding what has happened over the past year and the fact that we are living in a very geopolitically fractured world, and this is very much shaping the way we see and look at energy today. So over the past couple of years, we can certainly say that energy policy, industrial policies, climate policies, trade policies, competitiveness policies are becoming more and more interwoven. It's not anymore a world in which there is silos policies. All those things are interplaying with each other. I think there was a mentioning of competitiveness, and certainly for Europe nowadays, this is very much a key word. Maybe one number to give an indication of how we see these changes happening. We track policies around the world on energy, and I was very struck by the fact that if you look at trade policies for clean energy, and you look at how much trade policies were introduced over the past 5 years, up until beginning of 2023, for clean energy technologies, there were 50. Over the past year, only over the past year, 200. So this tells you in itself that we are entering in a completely different phase. Now, this phase in which trade matters, it has always mattered, but it's starting to matter in a different way, comes as an overlay of geopolitical issues. So here we start, as usual, with what's the core mandate of the IEA is oil. And one way we have to look at oil markets is spare capacity in OPEC plus countries. Today, actually, 2024, the number is even higher than what you see there. We have 5 million barrels a day of spare capacity. If you're not in the oil business, this will tell you what does it mean. Actually, it means that this market is well supplied. And is well supplied despite huge tensions in the Middle East. If you look at prices today, we could have seen nervousness and prices going up. Is not the case. And our expectation is that by 2030, thanks to lots of new investments that are coming from Canada, the United States, Guyana, Brazil, we are actually going to see in 2030 an even better supplied market. And this is good news, because we may see, and I come back to the word may, we may see effects on prices. We may see effects on prices. I'll come to the demand part in a second as well. If we look at a painful market for Europe, if I can use this word, LNG, After Russian invasion of Ukraine, we all have suffered in Europe. Citizens have suffered, industries have suffered, huge energy price increases. Well, this market is changing. It's not changing tomorrow. It's not necessarily changing in the middle of next year. But in the next couple of years, what we are seeing, again, huge wave of investment. I'll come back to this in a second. Again, the US, very central, Qatar. We are seeing a 50% increase in LNG liquefaction capacity. This means, finally, a bit of breathing space, especially for importing countries. If we move to the new energy economy, where the trade issues are emerging, solar, even in this case, actually, we are seeing a very well-supplied market. If you look at manufacturing versus demand, also here, we're seeing comfortable markets. Similar situation for batteries, mostly used for electric vehicles, but increasingly for balancing the grid, as was mentioned by the Director General a second ago. So if one looks at this picture, actually, you may be saying, oh, we are entering in a period where there is a more comfortable market situation across the energy sectors. But we put a but here. We need to be very careful because there are concentrations in all of those chains. In particular, if you look at oil, 20%, so 1 barrel in 5, is transiting the Strait of Hormuz. It means that any physical disruption that intervenes in the Strait of Hormuz would have consequences for everything, including prices. So we cannot put down the guard on energy security, even for oil. Similar situation for gas, 20% again, especially when it comes to Europe, as Qatar is going to be one of the areas where there is most of the increase. Again, Strait of Hormuz, incredibly important, 20% of LNG transiting to the Strait of Hormuz. For solar PV and batteries, we are also talking about a concentration, but it's a different concentration. We are talking about China, having the supply chain for nearly 80%, if not more, of both solar PV and batteries. Europe is now put in place quite a bit of policies with the Net Zero Industry Act and more to push on especially batteries. I would say we are doing much better than a couple of years ago, but very clearly there is still a very big concentration there. Now, if we switch to oil demand, we are going to see a switch, as we say. We are expecting, as we did last year, that oil demand is going to peak around 2030. And I will come back in a second on the key reasons, but if you want, there are two main key reasons. The first is China. China is slowing down very dramatically, is changing the way the economic engine is working. So that you can see on the right, China was accounting for around 70% of oil demand growth over the past decade or so. As you can see, demand growth is moving to very different countries. Is India, is Southeast Asia, is Africa. But China matters because of the huge volumes, and we come back to this in a second. There is huge uncertainty, and in particular uncertainty, there is uncertainty especially on the rollout of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles this year were globally 1 in 5 cars sold were electric vehicles. This is much, much higher than it was just a couple of years ago, and we are going to, in all our analysis, seeing a very steep increase, continuous increase in the sales. For a variety of reasons, happy to discuss those later. However, policies here matters hugely. So we have analyzed if we were, especially in 2 areas of the world, Europe and the United States, slowing down on the uptake of electric vehicles, and this will bring to a higher oil use of around 2 million barrels per day, but fundamentally, we are not seeing a very different shape of the curve, and I think this is important. Similarly, you may know that China has started investing massively in emerging economies where they assemble electric vehicles, very cheap electric vehicles. They still produce the battery in China, so the high value added is still located in China, ship it and assemble the car in a lot of emerging economies. This means that over the past 6 months, and here is data, I'm not talking about projections, over the past 6 months, the sales of electric vehicles in emerging economies outside of China has doubled, because the type of car sold there is basically at par and in some cases below the cost of the conventional engine. And here I go back to what was mentioned earlier about car manufacturing in Europe. I think is a huge, huge subject. We will actually discuss it somehow tomorrow on a new publication that really talks solely about clean energy technology trade. So I give you an appointment for tomorrow. But these investment trends that we are seeing in China could actually go faster than what we are expecting in the main scenario here in the steps. And this would actually accelerate the switch away from oil in those emerging economies where you have seen a lot of the incremental oil demand is coming. So uncertainty, and very much uncertainty related to what's happening to the market for electric vehicles and the positioning of China in these choices. LNG. So this is the situation for LNG current capacity. I said earlier we are expecting huge growth. Huge growth that should come to the market. We are expecting around end of 2025. This expects that most of the projects in the US and Qatar are running on time. We are, of course, monitoring this. There may be delays, and then in that case, it may be a couple of months later. But these volumes are coming to the market. And this means that the moment this hits the market, what we are expecting currently is that the type of demand, and similar to oil, is changing the geographical shift. The European Union, if continues to push in the same way, especially on decarbonizing power, will see a contraction compared to 2023 of gas demand. But China, India, and especially Southeast Asia demanding more and more. But even in this case, we are expecting that there will be some gas that will try to find home. It may mean that prices will be lower, and I would like to go back to the competitiveness issue. We worked very closely with Draghi for his report. It means that there may be a few years for European industries where there could be a breathing space and where European industry could think through about the next phase and where do we position our industry in a very, very competitive global environment where we continue to have differentials in terms of electricity prices vis-à-vis China, gas prices vis-à-vis the US. So how do we put ourselves in this very competitive market where the price differential, unfortunately, will not go to zero, but will decline in the next few years? So how to use wisely these few years, I think, is going to be one of the key topics that the Commission will need to think through immediately as they take office in the next couple of months. Do we have relatively abundant supplies everywhere? No. So if you talk with all of you operators, first of all, on grids, transformers is a huge headache. What you don't see here, skilled workers, is a problem everywhere. So there are areas where we need to move and move quickly. But if you focus on materials, so really physical stuff, you see here critical minerals and copper. This is based on supplies that have been announced by companies around the world. All of those are growing except for copper. But if you look at where demand is expected to be in 2035, we have gaps nearly everywhere. So we are really sending a bit of a signal, alarm bell. There is more than 10 years, there is time to actually bring this material to the markets with new investments, with recycling, with going to alternative materials. For example, in the case of copper, we have seen some of companies already going to aluminum. For batteries, we are seeing many more batteries trying to move away from lithium. But the situation as of today is that there are areas of the energy world, in particular for the clean energy transitions, where we are seeing real bottlenecks. Now, I go back to something that Madame Fernández at EDP mentioned earlier. one of the key messages that we have put forward in this year World Energy Outlook is about electrification. And I would like to start with actually electrification in China, because this may seem a very domestic Chinese issue, but is impacting everything. It's impacting everything. Today already China is one of the economies in the world with the highest electrification rate in the energy mix. And why did that happen? There are a number of reasons. One is because of the very high reliance on industries, and on industries that are more and more using electricity. To be very concrete, semiconductors, chips, even solar is all done with robots and electricity. So relatively high use of electricity, but also very much a policy choice. So over the past decade, if you look at the number of people that use electricity to heat their homes in China, it has doubled. Is it a climate policy? Not at all. It's a local pollution policy that is done basically to keep cities livable. So they pushed very strongly, and here is the consequences. Electricity is growing very strongly, and it's continuing to grow even more strongly. So one of the key areas of the Chinese energy system where electrification matters is EVs. Last month, the share of electric vehicles in total cars sold in China was 45%. So nearly 1 car in 2 sold in China last month was electric. An important data, because it's very different from the European market, 60% of the cars sold in China, the electric vehicles, are actually competitive with the internal combustion engine. And when I say competitive, I'm not talking about the lifetime. I am going to the car retailer and I'm buying an EV that is already cheaper than the ICE. Why is this happening? So I'll give you one number which I think is very important to understand what China is doing. In 2023, China spent $500 billion, $500 billion in trade for fossil fuels. This is the largest part in the Chinese economy, largest part in the Chinese economies for trade deficits, is the cause of the change in the trade pattern of China. It puts them in a dependency situation, and it's a real drain on the economy. So there is a policy choice behind this, because they need to put a lid on this capital that is going abroad and creates possible fragility for their economy. So they have invested heavily in their own domestic EV manufacturing. For this very reason. Is it a climate change policy? No, it's an economic policy. So if you look at our projections for 2035, if the EV sales were to be kept at today's level, we would have 5 million barrels per day more in the global energy market. So this is why this matters for all of us. 5 million barrels per day means that the peak we spoke about earlier wouldn't happen. But for China, this would mean hundreds of billions more in their trade deficits. On the contrary, if they continue to push EVs, they not only put a lid to these trade deficits, but they are actually igniting their GDP, their economy. I'll come back to this in a second with the next point, because this is clearly how internal domestic Chinese policies is impacting global markets. Is the case also for coal, because they're pushing. So coal, they're using it even today for electricity generation. It's the part of the economy, it continues to grow year after year after year. They're still using more coal this year than last year. But they're also investing hugely. When you look at the numbers, it's insane. The number of solar, the number of wind, the number of nuclear installations, 80% of new nuclear starts over the past 5 years were all in China. And at a certain point, if it's not next year, it's the following, we're going to see a change in the trajectory for coal use. And in the next 12 years, we're actually going to see a decline in coal use for power generation. Now, again, why is this happening? This is happening if you, again, data. Last year, China grew 5.2 percentage point of GDP. For China, this is the bare minimum that the government needs to maintain a healthy economy. It's really the bare minimum. And when you decompose where did this economic growth come from, 1/5 of that, so 1 percentage point, was from clean energy technology manufacturing. So this is the manufacturing of EVs we saw earlier, of solar, of grids, of nuclear, of batteries, etc. So it has become a driver of domestic economic growth. It is a driver of net positive trade, very little to do with the policies that we would say are about climate or environment. It's really economic, industrial policies. Now, this electrification, we are seeing it everywhere, even if at different speeds. But if you look at the past 10 years, electricity was growing at a rate globally twice as fast as energy. And we are expecting this to grow even faster going forward for a variety of reasons, including clearly a big China driver. Where is this electricity demand coming from? Still 40% in China. But emerging economies, cooling needs are growing incredibly fast. Demand for cooling last year was 2.5 times what it was in the 1990s. And this is solely the part that it is due to, we spoke about climate change, increased heat waves. Only this part is increased in emerging markets 2.5 times. In advanced economies, in our economies, we actually come out of nearly a decade of stagnant, to say the best, electricity demand. It was not a great business, but things are changing. Things are changing because of electrification, but also because of artificial intelligence, actually. We are seeing demand for data centers where those companies want to install the hyperscale data centers. It makes really a big difference in terms of growth in demand. So what you can see here is we're expecting growth from both conventional uses, the usual industrial needs, the usual lighting needs, but also new uses from AI to EVs and other electrification parts of the story. Our expectation is that solar and wind are picking up very strongly. And the reason is, again, sorry to say, sometimes it's really not climate that is driving this, is economic factors. Today, when you look at the cost of electricity of new projects in certain parts of the world for solar and certain parts of the world for onshore wind, they are the cheapest, not only vis-a-vis the alternative, but is the cheapest electricity ever produced, ever. I'll come back to the difficulties of introducing these terawatt hours in the grids in a second. But the expectation is that this will complement hydro, nuclear. We are expecting actually geothermal to have, there is a bit of a new buzz around geothermal, bioenergy, so that is a switch from conventional sources, in particular coal, less so natural gas, so that will be, by 2035, nearly 2/3 of the electricity will be clean, compared to around 40 today. Is it a seamless pathway? Not at all. We are seeing real bottlenecks already today in terms of grids. Unfortunately, grids is not keeping up. We are starting to see last year a bit of investment increase, but we see everywhere grids is not keeping up with this solar and wind. And unfortunately, even if these projections were to be realized, basically CO2 emissions are going to remain more or less flat. I want to thank Arcadio because last year here, exactly here in this very room, in September, end of September, we had a pre-meeting. So Spain was having the presidency of the EU, so they were also leading with Madame Ribera the negotiations of the EU, leading into COP28. And we had here, many of you were here actually, we had this preliminary discussion of what the EU could bring to COP, and we had identified two things globally to close the gap to a 1.5 trajectory, the tripling of renewable capacity and the doubling of energy efficiency. So if you want to know where this all started, it's actually in this very room with all of you, with the first discussion that Arcadio allowed us to do. And then, of course, the Spanish presidency really pushed through a lot of the diplomatic channels around the world, so congratulations. And those two targets were agreed at COP28. So we have a UAE consensus. And if the world was able to have a UAE, put in place the UAE consensus that was agreed upon by nearly 200 countries, we would have a very different trajectory. However, when we look a year on, whether we are moving fast enough or in the right direction, we cannot be really very optimistic. And when we look at the reason behind it, we wouldn't say that there is not enough manufacturing capacity to do the tripling of renewables. Actually, there is. And this wasn't the case 2 years ago, so there is reasons to be happy about. However, especially for renewables, the gigawatts don't matter so much. You really want gigawatts to become gigawatt hours. So it means that once you have installed your solar panel or your offshore or onshore wind farm, it actually arrives here and lights these beautiful candle lights. And what we are seeing is, as I said earlier, that there are two main bottlenecks today. Grids not being built fast enough. So we are really, we have put forward to the COP29 presidency, again with a lot of EU backing, that we need to really push on grids everywhere, whether it's ensuring that local factors are removed, socializing it, or just making sure that the investment framework is right. But on the other hand, tackling the flexibility needs. So this has to do with a number of things, from market design to investment frameworks and beyond. So we are about 2 weeks into going to Baku for COP29 before a new round of what is called nationally determined contributions, which means all countries next year in Brazil will need to put forward their new ambition for emission reduction in 2035. So what will happen in Baku for the energy sector will matter hugely to basically understand how far we will be able to close this gap. Thank you very much for your attention.
We would like to thank you for your outstanding presentation. It was a pleasure, as always, to have you here. Last year, it was in September, this meeting we will have before the COP28. And the goals, what do you think about the goals? The triple, just you told us before, and the double, the energy efficiency. Do you think you are keen to get it?
So for the tripling of renewable capacity, we are actually not very far. Even in the base scenario, we are at 2.7. But it's not necessarily electricity. Currently, it's gigawatts. And gigawatts in itself don't matter much for emission reductions, unfortunately. So there is work to be done on the enabling around it. So it's the grids, it's the storage, etc. And if you look at energy efficiency, I have to say we are doing very bad. Very, very bad. So we were saying a doubling, and actually for 2023, we've done the opposite. We've done a halving. So lots of work to be done across the world on a number of things, from technical efficiency to electrification to a number of other things. So the efficiency part is the one that has been spoken the least. So a lot of work to be done there.
You will have questions from the audience there. Here we have the beginning, the first one by Arturo Gonzalo. Arturo.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm Arturo Gonzalo from Enagas. It was a very enlightening presentation, and I appreciate it very much. I missed, though, some reflection on hydrogen. The agency has very recently issued the annual report on hydrogen, in which you are forecasting a very fast increase of capacity as well, more on supply than on demand, but happening anyhow. And also with a very strong focus on China, in which things are happening much faster than elsewhere, especially, for instance, regarding fuel cell hydrogen vehicles growing very fast. What do you think about that? And do you think that we can expect something similar to EVs in the hydrogen field, having cheap electrolyzers and cheap fuel cell vehicles from China being sold increasingly in developing economies in particular?
Thank you for asking this question. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. So we have just exactly released the Global Hydrogen Review, and I think that there are 3 key messages there. The first one is that we are seeing, compared to last year, a very fast increase of FID that would bring the amount of low-carbon hydrogen by 2030 double compared to the year before. So that's a good news. We're going in the right direction. We're still talking about relatively small volumes, but it starts to be an important volumes. Second important message is, I think, exactly as you said. We are seeing a lot of focus on supply projects and not enough focus on creation of demand. If we don't put this demand creation lot of focus, we will have this mismatch and it will not make much sense. We need to make sure that those projects are viable, and unless we don't have the demand. So we are speaking with governments to make sure that there is equal attention to the demand side of the story as on the supply. And the third is exactly the warning that you made about China. We were really surprised to see the amount of new investment that has come in China in 1 year. Mostly electrolyzers, a huge amount, with the potential of being cost competitive within the next 3 to 4 years compared to coal-based hydrogen. The risk is absolutely there, the one you mentioned, in terms of China having the ability to mass invest and starting bringing costs down, and with it a huge concentration. So we would warn policymakers not to commit, to learn from what has happened in Europe, certainly on solar, where we were the leaders years ago, leaders in production of solar, 1.2 million jobs, and then with a span of a couple of years, our consumers actually paid for the first installation of solar PV. So let's try not to make the same mistake. So let's try to learn from the solar PV to avoid a similar story for hydrogen. So thank you very much for having raised it.
The same politics that they were doing in the electric vehicles, I think so. Some more questions about something? Ready? There, you will have one there. You can introduce yourself, Luis.
Luis Irastorza, Green Building Council, Spain. Question about building sector. The European Performance Building Directive is forcing all buildings to be zero-emission buildings, 2050, new buildings in 2030, and asking for the elimination of fossil fuel boilers in 2040. And in Spain, there we had 10 million boilers, fossil fuel boilers. One solution, of course, is heat pumps, but other hypothetical solution would be biomethane. So I would like to see the forecast of potential and cost. Could we have in 10, 15 years biomethane at a price to be competitive with heat pumps of 60, 70 euros per megawatt hour? Have you got any studies about that? Because it is very significant for the sector.
So we have indeed started looking at biomethane and the potential and the cost of biomethane. We think it's promising. The current issues we're seeing is very localized and not yet at scale, obviously. Maybe the overall position of the IEA on this is the technology neutrality and making sure that is CO2 based. So cost matters. Cost matters for consumers as well. We do think that heat pumps is certainly a very good solution if you have very efficient buildings. In certain cities where building stock is maybe older, and you cannot think of retrofitting buildings that are Haussmannian, or in Rome, you may have difficulties in retrofitting, then alternatives may be more viable. So biomethane for us currently, the major obstacle is the very localized nature of it and the scalability. But it's certainly, you will certainly see it in in our numbers with as being part of the overall solution.
Any more questions? Or maybe, well, here we are, just one. The mic, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you, Arcadio, for the opportunity. Laura, from your privileged position in the AI, we would like to talk about the demand. No, yes, just the production. We have been talking a lot about the production and the different renewables. Just the demand, and we have four vectors: electrical vehicles, hydrogen, decarbonization of the industry, and electrification of the housing. What's your opinion about the politics in Europe, and what we can do more, and what your recommendation?
About the demand. The demand
more about the of electricity.
To increase the demand, we have incredible targets, but our question is how we can get this target.
computer centers too.
So, for Europe and other advanced economies, where we are seeing most of the potential growth for electricity is the ones that you have mentioned, EVs. I am starting being a bit more pessimistic about heat pumps. If you look at sales for the first semester 2024 compared to 2023, the contraction is 50%. I think we have spoken about regulatory stability. That's an example of regulatory instability, where a number of countries have pulled off the plug into either subsidies or the regulatory environment. The other main area of growth that is coming is really data centers. So we are starting a big discussion around it. We are hosting a major conference on 4th and 5th of December in Paris. We are bringing together the IT sector, all the utilities, and the network operator. We are starting to see some discussion that is not necessarily fact-based, so we would like to bring it back to facts. So if there is an interest, certainly we can extend you an invitation there. But it's clear that, especially for the renewables targets, having increasing demand will certainly be a factor of making it more achievable.
Some more questions, or maybe nobody's asking you about the nuclear because you are always in the agency talking about what do you think about the small and medium-sized reactor, the new politics, and about the IA and this trend related with nuclear power station?
So very factually, what has happened over the past couple of years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have started seeing in Europe a number of countries changing policies vis-à-vis lifetime extension. One case in point, certainly Belgium, Sweden is looking at it. France modified the stance. So we're seeing Poland interested in new reactors. So they're seeing countries with an existing fleet that are tending to extend the lifetime. So this is first thing. Second is more countries, we speak about my own as well, Italy, where we had a referendum in 1986 where nuclear was banned, and the new government in the new National Energy and Climate Plan that was put forward in September, they actually are considering nuclear. So there is, in a way, a renewed interest in nuclear for security of supply reasons. The financing remains incredibly challenging. So we are actually going to release a new study just before Davos in January on nuclear financing. And the third point you mentioned, Arcadio, SMRs. Over the past 3 years at our board, so we have countries from around the world, North America, Asia, huge interest in SMRs, but it was mostly government interest. They were saying, yes, we are interested. But what happened over the past couple of months is that there is real money behind it, and there is real money behind it from the tech companies. So we do think that this, with the more favorable policy environment, is actually kickstarting a real new era of SMRs. We will monitor whether this happens or not, because costs remain an issue. We want to see on the technology is there, because SMRs have been already installed. Russia, Argentina, there are several countries that have already been using the technology, but is the cost side. Yeah.
One question over there.
Good morning, Laura. Thanks for your brilliant presentation. My name is Alba Sande. I'm running my own law firm on energy. My question is, what would be your advice to our clients and foreign investors when they are worried about our secure policies here in Spain? Well, in Europe in general, I mean. Thank you.
So I think at the beginning, the President mentioned something which is very clear. So this energy transition is all about investment. And we need to explain this to everyone. The companies understand it. We need to explain it everywhere. And have a very brave and courageous way to tell it to our citizens as well. I think that currently we have had, in some cases, very divisive policies that have created even confusion among citizens. And when you look at the overall amount of foreign direct investments to Europe on energy, not all countries are doing the same. I would say that if you look at Spain vis-à-vis other countries, Spain is really not doing so bad. I could have other examples where investments are not as dynamic. So I would say that Spain is actually one of the good leaders within Europe in terms of investments. Just one word, I think that the next Commission will have this very much in mind, and I think the fact that there is Teresa Ribera designated on competitiveness as well, I would think that she has in mind very much the regulatory stability as well.
Okay, some more questions, or the last question, because Laura needs to leave. Maybe you could comment about something, because you have spoken about Hormuz many times. What happened there? Hormuz and the Strait of Hormuz, all the supply, the security of supply with this kind of war in this area?
So it's very clearly an area, a situation we are monitoring very, very closely with
Laura is always vocal about this.
With all our member countries. So we work very closely with Spain, the Commission, and all the member countries to monitor the situation. Currently, even if the tension remains incredibly high and worrying, from the humanitarian situation to the geopolitical one, prices have remained relatively stable. So I can only say that we continue to monitor what's happening, but keeping in mind energy security as a very central mission for the IEA.
Okay, thank you very much. You don't have any more questions about Laura. Thank you very much, Laura, for coming as everywhere. And thank you very much for the report. Not for the book, but for the report. Right? Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Applause for her.